Hello, everyone, and welcome to Africa Fire Mission's weekly virtual training. Africa Fire Mission. We're so happy you guys took time out of your busy schedules to come and join us for today's training. Today, we're joined by Mark Feyst. He's a well-known instructor throughout the fire service, Kenya. We're excited to have him back and teaching with us here today. Before we get started, just a couple administrative notes. If you stick around for at least 70% of today's training, which is usually about 40 or 45 minutes, you'll get a certificate of attendance for today's class. If you get cut off, you have a bad network, you don't have enough bundles, keep an eye in the chat there. Pretty soon I'll throw a link to our Google Drive where you can go and get a video of today's training, answer a few questions, and we can get you a certificate of attendance that way as well. After we get done with today's class, I invite you to stick around for tea time, hosted by Jose. Jose is AFM's fire safety advocate. And before we get started with our training, I'm going to pass it over to Jose, who's going to give us a few words of encouragement.
Thanks, Chief Mike. I truly appreciate you. And thank you, Mark Vanderfest, for coming back again. It's always a blessing to just have your trainings give to us and also share your knowledge to other people. So today I have a word of encouragement, and I'm actually picking it up from this booklet. This booklet is a chapter in the Bible, a Christian Bible, and I'll be reading from John chapter 15, verse 13. It goes, "The greatest love a person can have for his friends is to give his life for them." Wow, I repeat. The greatest love a person can have for his friends is to give his life. I repeat, his life for them. And for us as firefighters, we literally do that. We're actually on the forefront, going to actually save people, going to save property, going to save just about anything that can be saved. But the question to us is, are you ready to put yourself on the line? Have you been working behind the scene? People see you as a firefighter and they know, yes, this person is trained. But for real, are you trained? Do you practice? Whatever we talk to you about on Wednesday classes, or maybe in the symposium, or the daily drills in your firehouse, are you sure you're putting them in practice? Because when you are needed to actually go that extra mile, you need to actually put John chapter 15, verse 13 in play. Yeah? To give your life for his friends, for your friends, for people who you do not know, and also for the people that you know. So even as you continue with your daily errands and things like that, always remember you need to actually go back to your company drills and keep on practicing. You never know where you're going to need that to actually put John chapter 15, verse 13 in play. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Chief Mike.
Thank you, Jose. We always appreciate you and everything you do to help encourage the firefighters throughout Africa in their work. One last reminder, the name that you have on your screen name here in the meeting is the name that'll be on your certificate for the class. So be sure to adjust that to whatever you'd like your certificate to read. If you've got other people watching on your screen, go ahead and send me an email and I'll make sure that they get certificates of attendance as well. So now, without further ado, I'm going to pass things over to Mark to get today's training started. Take it away, sir.
All right, thank you, Mike. Thank you, Jose. Everybody, good afternoon, good evening. Good to see you all again from what I can see from my end. It's been a while since I've been with all of you. I think the last time for myself was in November, there in person. And then as far as a virtual session for training, it might be a few months at that time. So I'm back. I'm not, I didn't disappear. I've just been extremely busy with my duties as a battalion chief. And lately, up until Monday of this week, the acting fire chief as well for our department at this time. So our topic today is titled Firefighter Physical and Spiritual Health. And I'm going to be very upfront that this is a topic that is not common for me to speak about or teach about. Usually I'm going to be the tactics guy who's going to show you something hands-on, refine hands-on techniques and skills, develop those skill sets, maybe even leadership stuff as well, as far as officer leadership and strategy and tactics from that perspective. And looking at a topic as far as how we, as a firefighter, fire service, have to address the physical health is common, but not for myself to talk about. But also the spiritual health is really not discussed at all in any component of North America as a whole. For the most part, it's kind of suppressed and pushed out of the way, and they focus more on the physical side. So having said that, what I'm hoping to do this morning with you in a short time together is I'm going to look at both sides, the physical side, and then I want to look at the spiritual side as well. And hopefully, if I do a good enough job with my preparation, I'm going to link the two together to show you how the two are important and how the two complement each other. And without the one being addressed and focused on, the other one will falter and kind of fail away and not really be addressed for the most part. That's my hope. So let's go through this. It's not going to be very long. We don't want to hold on here, share screen. We don't want to make this mundane and as well be like a repetitive person speaking the entire time about the same thing here. So let's get the screen shared. Yep, this is what I want to share. There we go. All right. Hopefully you can all see this where you are. Again, it's not that important to see the graphics for the most part. What I want you to know is, or hear rather, is the words that I'm going to be conveying to you in this aspect here. What I'm going to start off with is the cover title slide you can see here. If you can see this picture, you're going to see two pictures. You can see a picture of a bunch of guys and gals at the fire truck. They're just finishing up some kind of a job at the scene, and they are putting things away or grabbing more equipment, and it kind of shows the community aspect of what we're looking at here, the firefighter itself, as far as our physical job that we are involved with. But also too, on the spiritual side, you look at that picture of the 1, 2, 3, 4, and the 5, 6 guys in that picture, and I'll tell you what I think sometimes when I look at fire scenes, when I go to medical calls, when I have gone to a medical call where the person has deceased, we call it vital signs absent, VSA. And what I think about a lot of times is I'm in command or as the officer in charge or the person themselves doing the work, compressing someone's chest and giving medical aid, or at a fire scene, removing the body from the building. One of the questions I ask myself is I wonder right now where their soul is. Is this person prepared for the eternality of life, which is the eternal aspect of it, or were they not prepared? Are they right now today, as their soul has departed from the body, is that soul with the Lord in glory, or is that soul been departed and cast into the eternality of death and punishment, as we know as hell? And that's a question I ask myself, because I'm curious to know what individuals in our industry think about that, and if they themselves are even themselves thinking about it in their own preparation for doing this job. The individual to the right is a good friend of mine, Captain Jimmy Ellis. He passed away in 2021, and he died from a rare form of gallbladder cancer. from down in the city of Pittsburgh. I've known Jim for a very long time. In terms of my first day in the fire service was where I met Jim down there in Pittsburgh, and I've known him for a long time up until his deceasement back in 2021. But I show his picture because, again, as we're going to look at the firefighter physical side, this job that we do in terms of our physical involvement does have and can produce deadly consequences. And of course, in the case of Jimmy, his consequence at the end was cancer and death as a result of the cancer due to the nature of our work. So we're going to go through this very short presentation I have, and we're going to look at the physical side first, and then we'll look at the spiritual side after the fact. Now, for some reason, my screen was on. There we go. Here we are. Now we're going. Okay, so let's look at some numbers. We have statistics that we gather here in the US of A. We're very good at gathering data. And because we gather a lot of data, it gives us a good picture, a nice big portrait that we can look at and get a better glimpse of what we're actually dealing with. And we're a little behind because it takes a while. It takes time to gather data. It takes time to study it and then put it together. So the latest report that we have right now is from 2022. So they're working on 2023 right now, and that'll be released sometime in the 24 year. But right now we have 2022. And based upon those statistics, that data, that numbers that we have, we can see a distinct two separate playgrounds that we take part in, that we play or we work in. And that's going to be the actual fire ground. That's where we go to calls. And then there's the training grounds. That's where we take the time on our downtime to practice, train, refine our skills, and get better at what we do in preparation for the fire ground when we go on and deal with calls. Those are the two distinct playgrounds that you and I are going to find ourselves working in. So with those two playgrounds, we're going to look at the numbers that are produced from those two areas that are quite alarming in terms of the physical health. In that year, 2022, there's a total of almost 66,000 firefighter injuries. That's in the US. We're looking at US only. So it's not the world or Africa or even other parts of the world, but just focusing on one country. Almost 66,000 firefighter injuries in that year, that's a big number. That's a lot of people getting hurt. And of that total number, 33% of that takes place in the fireground playground. So that's where you and I are going to go on calls. We're dealing with medical, structure fires, vehicle accidents, hazmat spills, all that 911 response topics that we deal with, or response criteria. That's where we get hurt. 33% of the time is going to be on the fire ground when we're doing the job. The other 67%, which is the main bulk of that number, takes place when you and I are in the training playground. That's where we have a non-response. It's a controlled environment for the most part. We have the safety aspects incorporated into it and everything else. And yet we still find ourselves having injuries that are sustained at a very high and alarming rate. Almost 67% of that takes place in the training ground environment. So what kind of injuries are we sustaining? All right. And look at the injury side of it on the fire ground, where we go as a response. There's no time to think. We got to act, react, and do our job. You're going to see in that bar graph, a very long bar. And the longest one you can see there is going to be muscular pain, strains, and sprains. That's the biggest category. And following that's going to be other, being anything else besides what's listed there. And then thirdly, it can be us getting cut or wounded somehow in what we're doing. But you look at that big one, muscular pain, straining and spraining our muscles, our joints, our body. Why would that be? Because we are physically exerting ourselves when we're on the fire ground. When it comes time to react, when someone needs our help, when there's a situation that needs to be mitigated now, we find ourselves in that process of doing something that we are going to experience some kind of a strain on our body because we are wearing extra equipment, extra weight that's being put upon us, depending upon positions we have to work in. We may find ourselves straining our body to try and deal with the situation in a very awkward or unnatural position, right? So this is why we have a very large number. If you look at the other smaller ones on the fire ground, as far as like being burned, right, only counts for 2%. And yet we as a fire service deal with fire a lot of time, but yet the burns and smoke inhalation only count for roughly 2%. Even if it's fire burns, it's only 9% compared to that 40% number of us straining and spraining ourselves in that way. So we get a big picture. We can see for ourselves a big picture being painted for us by those numbers. All right, so this little pie graph is showing us the cause, fire ground injuries by cause. So what's causing us to have these strains and sprains and muscular pains and us having cuts and wounds? Well, again, colors kind of help to show us which is the biggest piece of pie in this chart. Now, if you're like me, and I hope you are, you love sweets. I have a very weak appetite for, or sorry, a very weak, strong weakness for sweets. And I love pie, apple pie, lemon meringue pie, coconut cream pie, you name it. I like pie. So I look at this like, hey, I can relate to the pie because I like to eat pie, and there you go. So the big slice, which we always want to have a big slice of pie, is what you want to have for yourself. The big slice is the green one. If you can see that green color, it shows us that we are overexerting ourselves the majority of times. 32% is attributed to overexertion. What that means is that right now, as you're sitting, standing, listening and watching, you are in a natural position. But if you were to reach over and lean out of your seat, for example, or if you're on a ladder and you reach over and trying to grab something, or if you're bending over to pick something up, which is unnatural, that's overexertion. And when you push yourself to try and complete something, I got to get this, so I got to grab onto something, or I got to lift and drag or lift and pull something, and in so doing, you are overexerting your body's ability, which then lends into that strain, which is why we have a high number of injuries, because a lot of our job is exactly that. We are going to be overexerting ourselves. The public expects us to come and do our job, and we are going to do it. And when we go to do it, because of what's been handed to us as far as the situation, we react and we deal with it and we get the job done. And in so doing, we're going to find ourselves at some point overexerting ourselves. What's the next biggest category? Falls, jumps, slips, and trips. That counts for 22%. So falling, falling is not falling from a 10-story building. That would lead to a very different type of injury. It'd be death for the most part. But we're talking falls like when we're coming out of the fire truck, right? Very high step from the ground up. That might be you missed your step and you fell to the ground. Or it could be you're on the ground ladder. And as you're on that ground ladder, depending upon how high up you are, you fall off, and that's how you get injured. I've experienced that myself, falling off a ground ladder, and the result was a broken kneecap. So that's an injury on the fire ground, right, from falling. Jumping is also, you might think, well, how do we How do we jump in the fire service? How do I jump when I'm fighting fires? Well, we don't jump when we fight fire, but we do jump sometimes when we are getting off the truck, right? We jump off that truck very quickly because we want to go help the situation. So by jumping off, that's that overexertion, or that's where that sprain or strain may come in, and we sustain injuries that way, as well as slipping, right? Your feet don't get a good grip on the ground and you slip. And this can be in your environment. This could be from slippery fluids on the ground in terms of that way. Maybe torrential rains, it's very slippery. In that respect, up where I am, it'll be ice and snow. So when it's very, very cold, water freezes, and we have a high number of slips because of the ice and the snow. But down where you are, that won't be the case. And as well as tripping, right? Not watching where we're going, trip hazards, could be our fire hose. That could be a trip hazard. And we trip and fall over that way, and that's how we get injured. So you're seeing here different ways in which we are able to sustain those injuries. And it doesn't matter where we are in the world, North America, USA, Canada, Africa, these injury causes are the same. You're going to probably right now be thinking to yourself, hey, yeah, this rings true, because I remember this last year, or just last month maybe, or maybe last week, I tripped on something and fell, maybe hurt my elbow or hurt my back in some way when doing something. So it's very relevant to us internationally. Okay, so another little quick bar graph. Firefighter injuries by type, in terms of what were we doing to account for all the injuries that we sustain. And again, as I mentioned, there's two playgrounds, fire ground and training ground. And you can see there at the fire ground, the big tall bar. But if you look at the non-fire emergencies and the training, those two should be combined for the most part, because we do allocate training as non-fire emergencies. And look at what the details are in those. A lot of times it's going to be us doing something practice-wise and skill set, maybe not denoted as training, but it a lot of times is. So again, a very large number is going to be produced. But driving, look at that bar graph, the little bar to the left, and it says responding to or returning from incidents. That's us driving our trucks, driving our vehicles there and back. And we find ourselves sustaining injuries because of maybe our driving habits or someone else's driving habits that will cause the reaction from us to have to react. And in so doing, we get injured at that point. Right. So we can see again in the international application here, it's not just isolated to one unique country or one unique local. This is an international application where we do have trucks. You guys have trucks. You respond in vehicles. You're going to have those driving emergencies or driving situations where you may flip a truck on response, or on the way back, it may flip it, or get into a car accident, hit somebody, or someone hits you. And again, causing those injuries in that regard. So on the non-fire ground side, though, I remember I mentioned two playgrounds. Fire ground, the training grounds. This is looking at the training ground, non-fire ground injuries. And you're seeing here the different types, again, of what we sustain from injuries. And the very top of the list, just like it's like a parrot repeating itself, strains, sprains, muscular pains. Same as the fire ground, no different. It's a little higher number in terms of in the training environment. 57% of it is attributed to sprains and strains. When you look at the other different categories, like again, burns, it's almost down to zero in that regard. Dislocation, fractures, thermal stress, very, very, very low. It can happen, but it's very rare. The majority of the time that we are training or doing non-fire ground duties, like maybe educating the public on something, maybe inspecting a building for some fire inspection, that's also non-fire ground injury or non-fire ground activities, and we find ourselves experiencing strains, sprains, and muscular pain as well. All right, so I've kind of shown us where we do have these injuries, what types they are, and so on. So let's look at now, what can we do to reduce it? Obviously, there's a big picture being painted. We know that we are experiencing these different injury types. So what can we do to reduce these injuries? Well, the one there I have on the left is categorized as fitness. So we need to have some kind of fitness regimen that we are involved with, that we participate in, whether it's a personal one on your own or as a group. And why does fitness help? Well, fitness helps to keep up the cardiovascular. It keeps up the strength. It helps us to ensure that we can work at a certain pace with a certain amount of exertion being applied to us. Now, we don't have any kind of fitness routine or regimen. That's where we find ourselves getting weaker, and then we start to open the door for us to get injured all the more easily in the process. Tying it into the second category of stretching. Stretching really helps to reduce that strain, the sprains, the muscle pains in that way. And when we look at ourselves again at the overexertion, we're pushing our bodies beyond its limits in essence. And stretching normally helps our body to stay somewhat limber. So when we do actually exert ourselves a bit more beyond our limits, it's not going to be as detrimental as if we were not stretching at all on a regular basis, and then we exert ourselves. It's a lot severe consequence at the end there, right? So stretching helps, and I'll be the first to admit I don't stretch all the time like I should be. So I'm guilty of not stretching as I need to. I may do it once in a while, but I'm not doing it faithful every day as I should be. And if I were, I know I would see an improvement in my own physical abilities when I'm working on the fire ground. The third category there is to get help or use help, meaning that if I need to lift a heavy object or move something from one spot to the other, and instead of trying to think, oh, I can do it, I'm strong as a bull or strong as an ox, and I'll take care, I can do it myself. That might not be the best answer or solution. The best solution might be to get somebody else to help you. So now it's two of you lifting or moving something, which reduces that workload or reduces the exertion that's being put upon your body. So if you're able to, always seek out extra help and use that help whenever you can. Sometimes people will offer, hey, you need an extra hand to help you with something. And if that offer comes, say, yes, my friend, I can take it. I have seen firefighters who refuse help. So when the offer is made, because of their pride, their ignorance, they say, no, I got this. And when they go do it themselves, that's when they get themselves hurt. Right? So get help and use help. Wear your proper PPE. Always wear your personal protective equipment. If you wear your protective equipment, you're going to be ensuring your body will be protected when it does experience some kind of injury or some kind of harm that comes to you. So if I do fall, I'm wearing my proper PPE, my helmet, for example, to protect my head, or my firefighting gear, which may help to reduce the amount of cuts or wounds I may sustain in that regard. Again, you looked at the numbers, thermal burns, fire burns were very, very low. Why? Because in North America, we are always wearing our firefighting gear. And because of that gear, it does protect us very well against those items. That's why it's a very, very, very low number in that respect. However, when we are wearing our firefighting gear, it does add weight to our body, especially when we're wearing an SCBA. And because of that extra weight, we kind of fall back to the fitness and stretching side to make sure we are able to wear our PPE on a regular basis. So always wear it. The last category is know your limitations, meaning that when we're doing fireground tasks and skills on the fireground, you need to know what you can and cannot do. What am I able to handle on my own? And what can I not handle? Because if you know your limitations, then you know that you're not going to push yourself too far beyond that line, and the result of that push past that line getting hurt. And for the worst case, it's death. We didn't talk about death right now as far as fireground injuries, because injuries I'm looking at that we're still able to function, live, and recuperate or heal. But fireground injuries also include death. That is an injury. It's an injury. It's permanent. It's not changing. You can't come back from that. And we look at limitations. We don't want to go beyond that line where I'm pushing myself so far beyond that line of my limitations that I'm now going to be going in that category of permanent injury in that regard as far as the death side of it. So know your limitations, what you can and cannot do. If you know you can't lift that much, then always get help. If you know you need help advancing a certain hose line, certain size of hose line, or carrying a ladder, for example, or you're rescuing somebody from a building, or you're going to pull a person from their vehicle and you know that there's a little bit too heavy for me, that's knowing your limitation. Get help and help yourself in that regard. When I looked at, I'm going to jump back one slide here. As I mentioned, I haven't talked about the fireground death statistics. I didn't think about putting this in here this morning or today, but it's now in my mind. I'm thinking about it. And it ties into fitness. One of the leading causes for us as firefighters in the US for dying in the line of duty as far as activity is cardiovascular, cardiac arrests, heart attacks, stress on the heart, and having that cardiac arrest. That's the number one cause for us in the fire service. And that fitness regimen helps to reduce the cardiovascular emergency for the firefighter, as well as tying into other things like good eating habits, living a good lifestyle, and not killing your body in essence every day with the bad stuff like recreational drugs, alcohol, smoking, abusing it physically in terms of just I don't care, I'm not going to take care of myself, and I just live life recklessly. Those all line up like a domino in a line, and eventually will lead to, on the fire ground, you experiencing that cardiovascular emergency all the quicker and sooner. So I didn't really address that right now or this morning so far, but I'm mentioning it right now as the preparatory groundwork for the next side, which is the spiritual side of it. And certainly, as I mentioned, my friend Jim Ellis in the very beginning in that picture, he died from cancer, and cancer also kills firefighters on the fire ground, not like an instantaneous, but because of what we're exposed to on the fire ground, repeatedly, we contract cancer and different forms of cancer. And that cancer eventually, for most of us, a lot of the firefighters who have contracted it, they can either get a heal from it as far as have remission, or unfortunately, like in the case of my friend Jim Ellis, they do not, and they eventually are deceased and pass away as a result of that cancer. And so we know that we do have death on the fire ground. As far as us, we are going to face death, either cardiovascular, either by cancer, or in the worst case, in the throes of our job. I'm going to rescue somebody from a burning building, and in the process, the building collapses, I get trapped, I get crushed, and that's how I am deceased on the fire ground. So we are going to face death. And because we are going to face death, or the possibility of facing death, we need to prepare ourselves for the spiritual side. And this is the spiritual health we'll look at now for the next part of our time together, right? So as you see that first point, the physical health is temporal. It's temporary because we're not going to live forever in this current day and age. There is a time that we are going to be facing our own timely death. And if you look at scripture tells us that there's a point unto man. I'm just going to paraphrase. There's an appointed time unto man for his death. As soon as we're born, the stopwatch begins until that appointed time that we're going to be called into eternity and leave this current day and age. So the physical health is just temporary, just to get us from the day we're born to the day we die. Right? So that's why I say it's temporal. But the spiritual health that we're going to look at, this is eternal. This is going to last forever. And this is why in the beginning I mentioned that this is, I believe, the important side of the two equations. If I can address the spiritual side and have that spiritual health met, then the physical health will follow suit and will carry on and will be addressed as it needs to, and it's also covered. Right? I'm going to use a verse of scripture that's at the very bottom there, as you can see, and I've used the word prepare already in our first half hour, and that is prepare to meet thy God. That's in the book of Amos, chapter 4, verse 12. Prepare to meet thy God. And that is what we are, when we are born as a baby, we start living our lives, as I mentioned, that countdown clock begins. And the countdown clock begins to us to, at some point in time, we are going to be face to face with the Lord. The day of judgment will happen. We'll be face to face with the Lord. And either I'll be told, come on in, or depart from me. Those are the two things I'll be told as I meet the Lord my God. So that's why I use that verse there, prepare, because on the spiritual health side of it, we need to be prepared to have the answer question, or the question answered. Am I prepared to meet him when that time comes? Let's look at the statistics, right? I show you some stats, some data from the fire service as far as fireground injuries. Let's look at some statistics in the eternal side of it. And the bad news is it's 100% fatality rate. We are all going to, at some point in time, die. Not a very happy message, but it's the reality and the truth of what we face in this day and age. And why do we have this 100% fatality rate? Well, it's because of the curse of sin. Again, think back to the days of creation with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And when God gave his law to man, which was, if you don't do this, you shall live forever. And when man disobeyed and did what they're not supposed to do, that was when the curse of sin came into our existence. So because of sin, and as the Apostle Paul writes in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12, wherefore, as by one man, that's Adam, sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for all have sinned. That's you and me. That's me. I'm in that category. I am the one that's in there as far as for all have sinned. So because of sin, sin produces death. And that's why it's a 100% fatality rate that we are dealing with on the eternal side of it. So that's why I asked the question, are you prepared? Prepare your soul. Is it ready to meet the Lord your God? When we go to a structure fire call, or if I'm going to an explosion at a building or a vehicle accident on the highway, or anything I'm going to as a 911 emergency response where I work, the last thing I want to be thinking about is this the call or the moment that I'm going to be dying? Am I going to go this call? Am I going to not come back? Because I'm thinking about everything else as far as who I have responding with me, what's the weather, what's the address, what's the building like, how much fire do we have? Is there people in that building? All these factors is what I'm thinking about. And the last thing on my mind is the thought of, am I going to die at this fire? And the reason why it's in the back of my mind is because the question of, Is my soul prepared to meet the Lord? The answer is yes. It is prepared to meet the Lord. And when the soul is prepared, to meet the Lord, then the physical will also be prepared. So if I have the eternality, the eternal side of the question answered, then the physical, which is temporal, is also answered. Because even though this body will at some point be put into the grave, as you see there in the picture with the casket, as it's put into the grave, the soul will still live. And as that soul lives, it's either going to live with Christ in glory, or it will be departed from Christ into eternal death with the devil and his angels. Right? So that's why the question has to be asked by each individual for the spiritual health. Is my soul prepared to meet the Lord my God? When you have that spiritual health, when your soul is prepared to meet the Lord, it produces peace. The world is always trying to fight and strive towards having peace. We all want it. And yet we see in our day and age, just on the news today, we see of wars in Ukraine, wars in Israel, we see wars in other parts of the world, and we see all this strife that takes place around us. And yet everybody wants to have peace, and which would be nice to have. With spiritual health, when we address the question of the soul, it produces peace in the person's life. That's what it produces. And that peace of mind, knowing that when that time comes, when that day comes, that I'm called into eternity, that peace of mind is, I am prepared. I'm ready. I'm not afraid in terms of facing death. I don't want to die, but if that day comes, I'm not afraid to face the moment of death. Another verse of scripture I'm going to add here. I'm going to hopefully use this to kind of build upon 3 or 4 more points, help address the peaceful side, the spiritual health. How do we achieve that? And it's in the book of Deuteronomy. And it's instruction to the nation of Israel, telling Israel what they are to do. This is your basic instruction for the day or for the rest of your life, which is, and now Israel, what doth the Lord thy God require of thee, but to fear the Lord thy God, to walk in all his ways, and to love him, and to serve the Lord thy God with all thy heart and with all thy soul. Let's break that down, right? Spiritual health equals peace. How do I have peace? First off, it's by fearing the Lord thy God. It is not a matter of being afraid and like hiding in a corner. That's not that kind of fear. It's the fear of being mindful of him at all times. Being mindful of the fact that the Lord is here. God is real. He is here now with me. And knowing that he is in control of all things, good, that we may look at as being good or bad. We see a lot of bad things in the world taking place, but yet God is in control of all things. That is fearing the Lord thy God, giving reverence to him at all times, and being thankful to him for everything that he's blessed us with in our life and in our days that we have with here on earth. The second thing is to walk in all his ways, right? So to fear the Lord and then walk in all his ways. And that involves obeying him, right? The picture of the walking path is a good illustration of us to be remembrance of, we are to walk in the way that he has laid out for us. Obeying him, obeying his word, looking to his word, which is scripture, the Bible, looking to his word for guidance, for direction, for instruction. And by looking to his word, we're going to follow and we're going to be walking in his ways, right? And we can look at the best example that we can look to is Christ himself, as far as how Christ lived his life on earth for that short 3-year time frame. He laid the example for us to follow. And so if we walk in those same ways, that's how we're going to be achieving that spiritual health and addressing it in terms of achieving that peace with him. To love him, right? That commandment in Deuteronomy was also involving to love the Lord thy God. And when we look at what love is, our friend Jose here in the beginning gave us a little devotional from the book of John about the greatest gift or the greatest love that a man could have is to lay his life down for his friends. That's what Christ did for the sinner. Through love, he came and redeemed his people by laying his life down on the cross for the sinner. And so we are to love him. And we love him because he did provide for us a way to have life eternal with him in glory. And that involves obeying him, obeying the call of salvation is to follow him. As I mentioned in the previous point, to walk in his ways. So we're going to follow. I want to follow Christ. I want to follow the Lord in his ways and serve him as best as I can. And perhaps in this circle of friends right now, our best way to serve the Lord is by serving the public as a firefighter. I'm showing that great love that Christ had for the sinner by me going and sacrificing myself to help a person in need when they need that help. And so by loving the Lord, it puts life in perspective for you in a much better light, a much better lens than what we see through the world's eyes about what love is. Serve the Lord with all your heart and soul, right? Again, think back to that verse in Deuteronomy. It ended off that we're to serve the Lord with all thy heart and with all thy soul. And that is living your life, as I mentioned, for him already. Living your life for the Lord. You're serving him in all things. And by serving him first, by putting him first as the first fruits of your life, when you serve him, everything else falls in line thereafter. And because I serve him, I'm going to naturally serve others in the same capacity, with that same love, with that same mercy, with the same grace that I can show to them that the Lord has shown to me in terms of my salvation from sin's curse. And by serving the Lord and serving others, as that third bullet point says, it does have that complete fulfillment for you in your life, right? We can feel and know that fulfillment is there, that I am serving something that is worthy to be served and is forever, as opposed to something that's temporal, very temporary. I can serve an idol of something. An idol can be a nice car. I always take care of it. I'm always washing and waxing and always maintaining. I'm going to serve that car with all my work and with all my free time. That's serving a temporary means. But when I serve the Lord, it is forever. It is eternal. And it helps me to have that fulfillment, knowing that I am serving the Lord with all my heart and with all my soul. And with that 100% commitment of me doing so, it means that I am resting completely in him. And that's peace. I'm resting in the palms of his hand. And by being in the palms of his hand, I have that complete peace and knowledge that no matter what I face, no matter what kind of call I go to, whether I'm going to the call or coming back from the call, when I'm on the training grounds or in the station or at home, driving, living, doesn't matter what I'm doing, I have that peace of mind knowing that when that time and moment comes where I'm called into eternity and my appointed time of death has arrived, I know that I'll meet and be with him in glory. And that's complete peace. That is how we address the spiritual health of the firefighter. And we have that peace of mind and the peace within our soul, then the physical side follows suit. I will take care of my body. I will live my life with the Lord by living with good habits of living, not the bad habits of living. And by so doing, when I am doing that, as far as and the good habits, I'm assisting my body to maintain itself for the course of the job I have to do. Right? So the physical health is fortified by the spiritual health. And so in our viewpoint today, I hope if when you take what the takeaway you should leave today from our little time together is you need to address the spiritual health first. That's number one priority, is addressing the spiritual health. And the question of, is your soul prepared to meet the Lord? And then the second priority is the physical health. Because once the soul is prepared, then you will want to prepare your body and to maintain your body on the physical side to do the job that we do. All right, so that's all that I have for you this morning. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can go back to the host. And I do apologize, that loud slamming door. I have my windows open. The wind is picking up in our house here, and so the doors are slamming shut all over the place. And you may have heard that that loud noise from one of the doors closing. But I thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, by all means, if you're able to, let's have a little question time and we can answer something you may have a question about.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. What a great presentation. Topic that here in our area we don't get to talk about too much. So it was great to hear. Thank you for that. I think at this point in time, I'm going to wrap up the formal portion of the class, but we want to take some questions and things. So please stick around. Let me just wrap us up here quick by thanking Mark for coming and today's presentation. We always appreciate your expertise on a wide range of subjects. So thank you for that. Thanks to Jose for being here as well. And thank you to all of you for taking the time out of your schedules, for the money that you've spent on your bundles to be here. It's much appreciated what you do to better yourselves and to better your community. I invite you all to join us again, same time next week. Thanks, everyone.